Hi, welcome everyone to another presentation on how to avoid food waste. Such an important topic, and as you would have gathered by now, there's so many different facets to it. So there's been presentations on storage, presentations on meal planning, presentations on pantry and shopping, and presentations on the ingredients, so the food component. And I'm so excited I get to bring one of those to you today. What is today's presentation about in terms of avoiding food waste? So Sustainability Victoria have done some work. They've found there are 4 commonly wasted ingredients across Victoria. Of those 4 commonly wasted ingredients, they are the ones that are problematic for a lot of households, or that's what it indicates anyway. So today's presentation, the aim of today's presentation is to show you some storage strategies, some information about the ingredients, because as you'll see, unless you actually know the ingredients, you're like, hi, my name's Kylie. Yes, you're a banana. Tell me about you. Unless you really know these ingredients, how can you even relate to how they should be stored? So some information about the ingredients, and then we're going to look at some recipes. We're going to do a little bit of cooking, and I'm going to share with you some sort of crazy recipe that I put together as well. So all of that's what you've got to look forward to. Intertwined with that will be some hints and some actions for you to therefore go and try. And in doing so, again, remember our main goal, minimise food waste. Why? Why is it so important that we avoid food waste? And you may have seen this before, but let's bring them out again. The little picture. Okay, so the little picture is all about you as an individual and how you avoid food waste. So there's some points I've written here. So one of the really important things as to why you avoid food waste is it saves you money. It saves you money because you're not wasting the things that you've purchased to consume. Nothing much more than that. It saves you time. It saves you time because you don't have to go to the supermarket as much, because all the things that you've bought you're actually using. That's great. And because you've got a planning component and because you're thinking through what meals you're going to prepare, it actually encourages you and your household to eat healthier. So many bonuses, so many pluses. This is why it's important not to waste food on a little picture context. Big picture stuff, what we're looking at, big picture as to why we need to avoid food waste, is because outside of us as individuals, it heals our food system. Our food system is unfortunately quite broken. It's quite linear. And what do I mean by linear? What I mean is that when something is used as a resource and then no longer is needed, rather than it being reapplied and reconfigured, it actually gets thrown out as seemingly as waste. And that's a very linear system. And it doesn't use those resources in what we're hoping to move towards, which is a circular style of use, or a circular economy. You might have heard those terms, whereby once things get to the end of our immediate use, we can then, or rather the resources, are then reapplied, reconfigured. Maybe they're loaned out to someone, maybe they're chopped up into pieces and each of those pieces are given on to another system. That circular economy is way better for the limited lot of resources that we have on our planet. Again, big picture, reducing food waste is also, it shows a respect to our past, the people who lived here before us, and it shows respect to our understanding that our future generations are going to have needs, and they're not going to necessarily be able to meet those needs unless we start to look after the resources we've got available to us today. So it shows a respect that we're not the only ones using these. It's beyond us. And as I mentioned, it better applies our finite resources. So those resources are everything, not just those eggs in the carton, but it's also the carton, and it's the packaging and the design of the carton and the transport, and all of those aspects are really, really part of the resources that are involved in our food chain. So you using that food or those ingredients really means you respect and you understand and you're applying all those resources in a really good, complete fashion. So, big picture, that was deep. That was very deep. All right, so let's move into something, I'm not going to say shallow, but something perhaps a little bit more applicable and relevant to what you can find in your own household. Okay, so what are these 4 items that we've got that are in, problems in terms of commonly wasted food ingredients? So, we have them, quite not coincidentally, we have them in front of us here. Number 1 is bananas. Number 2 is bread. Number 3 is spinach. And number 4 is yogurt. So each of those ingredients, according to Sustainability Victoria, are wasted quite commonly across households. All right, so let's talk firstly, I suppose, about shopping. So I just want to encourage you to revise the presentation on shopping in the idea that you shop only for what is on your list. And that list you may have got from the meal planning presentation. Shopping on your list means that you've got the quantities and the ingredients that relate back to the meals you're going to prepare that week. How perfect is that? It now means that you're going to have less likelihood of having waste. And that is our main aim. Also, shopping for the ingredients that you only need and shopping for the quantities you need, of course, means that you're spending your dollar very wisely. That's another advantage. For more of the shopping information, by all means, as I suggested, visit the shopping presentation and just try and apply some of the hints and things there. And that again, limits food waste, yay. Talking about storage, as I sort of indicated earlier, if you're going to know how to store something, you really need to understand about the ingredient and what it is you're storing. Let's put it that way, it looks much more happier, doesn't it? Much smiley banana. So bananas have been picked, usually green, from a large palm tree-like plant, which is actually a member of the grass family. The big banana palms have one inflorescence, and they have clusters of these bananas are known as their inflorescence. They have one of those per season. So they have 3 growing shoots and one of them will flower. So it's quite a precious flower because it takes a long time for that to develop. This is still a living entity, even though it's been removed from the plant. So there are a whole lot of sugars in here and a whole lot of metabolic reactions happening which produce a gas known as methane. That methane gas is ripening the bananas. And in fact, if we sat it near, I don't really have anything else, but if we sat it near some apples or some avocados, it will ripen those too. So the methane gas is quite volatile. It's quite mobile. And so if you're talking about storage for these, your best storage is to actually store them away from other fruit and vegetables in a relatively cool, but not the fridge, and low light types of conditions. So that sort of storage environment would be the ideal, longest shelf life providing environment for a banana. Okay, now I'll put these to one side. Okay, moving on, let's look at some spinach. Okay, so I've got spinach here, but this relates to most of the greens. So I want you to think about, I want you to put your I am a green vegetable hat on, or a green leafy vegetable hat on. Now before you're harvested, you've got roots in the ground and you've got your shoots, which are your leaves, below your leaves. Those leaves are losing moisture and evaporating all that out into the environment with often great speed. So when we take that leaf off, it no longer has the roots which replenish all the moisture into this leaf. Not a great thing when this leaf is still evaporating moisture and water. So what we need to do for a storage context is replace that. Now, I'm not just saying that we need to replace it by putting roots on this. What I'm suggesting is a really good storage technique is to wrap your green leaves in a damp cloth and put that in a sealed container and keep it cool in the chiller or in the fridge somewhere. You can also, rather than using a cloth, you could drizzle them in just a little bit of water. But providing that moisture and cooling that environment is the best way to store your green leaves. I keep saying leafy, green leaves. Yogurt, in terms of storage, is a completely different beastie compared to what we've talked about with bananas and with spinach. So to store yogurt, to understand what yogurt is as an ingredient, so we've got a dairy product as a starting point, and then what's been introduced to that dairy product is a whole lot of little critters. I'm going to call them critters. So they're yeasts and sometimes bacteria, and what they're doing is they're actually consuming all of the sugars and proteins in that dairy, and in doing so, replicating themselves. So there's a big, busy environment left in here. Consequently, to slow that process down and make sure that that has a long shelf life, you need to keep your yogurt chilled. But further than that, you need to make sure that no other bugs and no other critters other than the original ones invade. So when you're scooping a few spoonfuls out at midnight, after watching a movie or something, and just want something sweet, you might go for the yogurt. Make sure that you have a clean spoon, make sure that you wipe the rim of the container, and make sure that any spills around the edges are cleaned up, because in our air, all around us, are all that gorgeous fungi and all other entities floating around. And if they find a source of sugars, they will grow. So by keeping cleanliness and keeping it stored cool, then you'll find you'll get your longest shelf life for your yogurt. And our last one, of the four at least, is bread. So in terms of bread, let's divide it as to two different types, because I need to encourage you to think about the storage of them just slightly differently. So this one is a highly processed origin, yeast-derived bread. And this bread has it has some preserving elements to it that are added in a different way to it being added in the process of making it. It's a bit confusing, but what I'm saying is it's not sourdough. All right, so this is a yeast-based bread. So consequently, for storage for this, the most ideal way is to actually limit the amount of oxygen that's in here. So when you're putting your little tie back on the bread bag, make sure you squeeze without flattening your bread. Squeeze out the air. Keep the amount of air in that bag limited, and that will help the storage of it. Sourdough is a little bit different. So if we think about the process of making sourdough, you have a sourdough starter, and that sourdough starter, when put in with the flours, starts to do a little bit what the critters in the yogurt were doing. They were starting to consume and break things down. Now, the byproduct of that is quite an acidic sauce, and in fact, that's one of the reasons we love sourdough, is that beautiful sour flavour. So the sour element to the sourdough, the critters just don't like it so much. So sourdough has the ability to last without being in a plastic bag, wrapped in a tea towel for the first few days of its life quite well. So you can leave it on the bench with a tea towel over the top, and it will not be invaded by the other critters simply because of the acidity of the bread. You can, however, if you're going to leave it, or it's going to be around for maybe 3 or 4, longer than 3 or 4 days, whose sourdough is going to be around that long? But anyway, if it was, then that would be when I would put it in a container and just put it in a sealed container to once again limit the amount of oxygen that it gets exposed to. Okay. All different little beasties, all requiring slightly different storage. But if you're able to do that, you will definitely get a longer shelf life. And of course, I'm going to sound like just repeating myself, but that's important. Less food waste, you know, the ultimate aim. Okay, I have all these other things around me. I'm sure you're thinking, what is she going to do? Is she just going to talk the whole time? No, let's get some action happening. So we've talked about storage. So by all means, go back and do some actions and revisit how you're storing particularly these 4 ingredients. Think about what their origin is, how they started life, and where they would like to be in a storage context. If you have them, these ingredients, and you need to use them up, this is where we need to go now. Okay, so bananas, we talked about storage. There's 2 recipes here, banana berry bread and banana oat cookies. I happen to have pre-made, ta-da, the banana oat cookies, and testimony to the others in this room, I think they're quite edible. It's a fairly straightforward recipe, just involving some plain flour and some baking soda, creaming some sugar, adding an egg, adding mashed banana. It suggests dates, but I quite successfully added sultanas instead, baking them in the oven for about 15 minutes. So that recipe is similar to a lot of other biscuit recipes, but you've incorporated the banana. Probably the only hint I could add to that is that if you wanted a little bit more banana flavour in your biscuits, I would actually encourage you to use quite ripe bananas. So the ones that are in the need to use now category would be ideal. Alternatively, if you've had some of those need to use now bananas and you've peeled them, chopped them in pieces, put them in the freezer, then they also would be quite okay to come out of the freezer and used immediately in something like this too. So that would work. Okay, so let's make a recipe together today. So in your notes you'll find amongst the spinach section. And why is spinach in that section? Well, because some studies have found of the most commonly wasted vegetables, spinach is one. And you can imagine, it might not be hard for you to work out that wilted green mass in the bottom of your fridge could become something delicious and delectable, and that would be spinach mini frittatas. So if you have a look in your notes, grab that recipe and we'll have a go at making that together today. Okay, so I've got most of the things I think that I need here, so let's get started. We'll turn on the induction. So this induction cooktop is just a little mini one. It uses magnets to translocate the heat right to the point where it's required. The great thing about using electricity to cook is it's a renewable energy. And of course, we know the value in that, particularly if we have solar cells. So let's start out with our frittatas. The first thing we're going to do is add our onion to our frying pan. So I'm just warming the frying pan, warming the oil in there. I've got some Spanish red onion here. You could use a whole range of different onion products, onion vegetables, all of them in the allium family. So you might have some chives in your garden, you might have some brown onions. Any of those would work as substitutes. We'll pop the red onion in there and get that frying away. See how delicious it becomes. So when I say delicious it becomes, what I'm talking about here is our aim when you're frying your onion is to help release some of the sugars that are held up in that onion. So you want to subtly fry it in that little bit of oil. You know that brown colour that you start to get? That malaise, or that caramelization, is part of that process, and that enables that flavour to cross over. So you don't just get that tang that you can sometimes get from raw onion. You actually legitimately get that sort of subtlety, browning through that caramelization process, and that brings that flavour to a different level. So while we've got our onion cooking up there, we'll get some ham prepared. So I've just got slices here of leg ham. Ham is one of those other ingredients that you need to be really conscious of its origin. So there's a lot of different ham products that you can access, but I would suggest that you always look at the origin and try and buy local, and that may be Australian, wherever possible. We've also got some capsicum here, which we're going to add to our onion that starts to fry up. And unfortunately it's not smell-o-vision, so you can't smell what's going on, which is a little shame. Nonetheless, you'll be able to see the steam rising and just use a good imagination. So in doing that, the capsicum, we've got red and green capsicum. The red capsicum is a very sweet version of the capsicum. The green one is a little bit more tart. Those two different colours will bring two different flavours to this frittata. And quite rightfully, the red capsicum gives that nice little tang of sweetness, when most of the other ingredients here don't have that sweet element. Hopefully, if we get our onion right with a little melasse and our caramelisation, we'll get a little bit of sweetness cross over there as well. So we're just starting to get that all browning off. So while you've got that happening, you can cut up some more of your ham. I've just got cutting it into strips, and if you can't get leg ham, by all means you might have some ham off the bone that you can shred. And again, keeping it nice and fine means that when your frittata is in your container, it doesn't fall apart too badly. So we'll pop that to one side as well. And the other important ingredient in a frittata is the eggs. Now, I am really lucky because I happen to have a whole lot of homegrown eggs. Those homegrown eggs have the best colour. Let me show you. So it means that the yolk is full of all that reflective goodness that the chook, being an omnivore, gets to eat. We need to, we'll pop them in there, another container. We need to keep the eggshells separate because those eggshells are great things to have in your garden. Just a temporary thought. No, just a temporary segue. I'm just going to turn our onion and our capsicum off. We've just got that starting to brown, which is perfect. Back to our eggshells. So with the eggshells, what we tend to do both in the restaurant here but also at home is I put them in a separate container and a warm place, and it makes the eggshells go really brittle. Consequently, you can actually crush them really finely, spread them around the garden or put them in your compost heap, and they're a fantastic source of natural calcium, and that the critters and all the bugs love to consume and access, particularly in my place, which is south in Victoria, cold, temperate weather. Calcium doesn't translocate through plants very well, so having a readily supply available to them is really, really helpful. And also enables the soil aggregation to be really effective and efficient if the presence of calcium is there. So keep the nuts and bolts of that big long story is keep your eggshells separate, keep them warm in the kitchen. They'll dry out quite well, brittle, smash them all into small pieces, spread them around, and we've got a fantastic source of calcium. One more thing about your eggshells is also they have a natural deterrent for snails and slugs. And who doesn't love a natural deterrent for snails and slugs? I mean, it's not many friends they make out there. Consequently, if you, when the eggshells are fresh, have planted some seedlings, you can put the eggshells around the outside of the seedlings in a bit of a circle or whatever shape. The snails and slugs won't even smell your little baby seedlings, and they won't go anywhere near them. The only disappointing part to that is when it rains, you've only got sort of 3 or 4 days of protection, so it's washed away in the presence of rain, which just means that you need to either top up with more eggshells or think about another deterrent, which might be citrus, which I'm sure we'll talk about at another time. Back to our frittatas. So we'll put 4 eggs, and I love the diversity of the shape of these eggs in here. We're going to add those to our little bowl, and then we'll grab it, while that's cooling down a fraction, we'll grab our muffin tray. Pop those all to one side. And some milk. You can see I'm not measuring very well. I just believe in dashes and dollops, I'm afraid. We'll whisk those together rather. So the idea in whisking these together is you're actually combining a couple of different fats together here. So the fat of the egg yolk with some of the fat of the milk, and then you're introducing a little bit of air to that. And that air, as long as you don't beat them too much, means that you get fantastic rise from the eggs. So it enables the little frittatas to be a little bit lighter and fluffier. If you beat that or whisk that too much, you may take the air out of that and then the eggs lose their structure and you don't get as much rise. Okay, we'll turn this back on and we're going to add our spinach and just wilt this off. So some spinach in there, remember that? Don't leave it down the bottom of the crisper. Use it in frittata. That's the plan. Okay, so we'll just wilt that off a little bit and add some milk. A little bit more. I've added a little bit more milk to that because I could see that our eggs were not separated properly. So sometimes you find that the little yolk part and the white part doesn't actually mix in completely with the milk. So I've just added a little bit more. And as I said to you, I'm not very good at measuring. So just an observation, just looking at things can sometimes tell me, oh, Kylie, you've got to add more, you've got to take that, you've made that as an error. Oh, you've done really well. That will help. So don't underestimate the value of observation. Let's oil our muffin trays. I have a bit of an industrial oiling mechanism here, which is what I use at the restaurant. So I've just added that into there. Okay, so we've got our spinach leaves wilting off. Grab some tongs. So the moral of this frittata story is, if you haven't got spinach, if you've got any other greens, you can use those as well. So you could make these kale and spinach frittatas. You could make them vegetarian, leaving out the ham, or you could make them chicken by putting in some shredded chicken. So we're just going to put those in just a little bit. We're going to spread the filling, which is our spinach and onion filling with some capsicum around each of those little muffin holes of our pans. Make it evenly dispersed so everyone gets a little bit of onion, good for the nervous system, and everyone gets their green chlorophyll section full of magnesium. Then we'll top it up with a little bit of ham, some of the shredded ham on top there. Again, make sure it stays in the muffin holes. It can get really messy otherwise. And make sure you oil the pans really well. Egg has this great virtue, which we've discussed already, but it does stick to things if you don't oil very well, and you'll get some grumpy dishwashing helpers if you make that error. Okay, now let's see how good I am at pouring. See if we can just get a nice little... We'll pour the egg mix on top, and don't fill the muffin hole right up to the brim. Just leave it perhaps half a centimetre below. What you'll find as these bake, they will rise, and they'll rise up quite high above the muffin holes, and then as they cool, they'll shrink down again. There, we haven't spilt too much, a little bit. They'll rise up above and then shrink down. So don't fill the complete muffin container with egg. Allow some rising. Now I'm just crumbling a little bit of feta over the top of these, which is a nice little salt addition. And then because we haven't put any salt and pepper on our egg mix, let's just scatter a little bit of cracked pepper on top. And they can get baked in the oven at about 160 degrees or about a moderate oven. And they'll probably only take about 15 minutes in there. And they're fantastic as something you can have for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And you can modify them up, but just make sure that you don't leave that spinach in the bottom of the crisper, that you do something creative with it. Now, if you have some yogurt that needs using up, and I love making this because I love the versatility it brings to yogurt, one of them is to strain the yogurt. So it's really basic. As you can see here, I have an old ricotta strainer and a piece of muslin, which you can use an old tea towel if you have instead. So basically put your yogurt in the base of a container and a catching container. I'm not sure if you can see also, but this has only been here for a short while, but there's also a little bit of whey in the bottom already. So what happens is as you strain the yogurt and you put that whole thing in the fridge, the whey comes off the yogurt, making this much more like a cream cheese consistency. That means all those things you made with cream cheese, you could actually put a yogurt twist on it. So it's sort of, Labner is very much a fresh cheese, so it has got a short shelf life, but you could make cream cheese slice, you could make cheesecake, you can add the little dollops of labna to a curry. There you can add some semolina and an egg and make this beautiful like fudgy slice with it. So there is so much you can do in both a savoury and a sweet context. It's a really basic, straightforward one that you might like to think about doing. If you've got a flavoured yogurt or if you've got a natural or a Greek yogurt, this will still work, but obviously the flavoured yogurt you would rather use sweet things for, and the natural and the Greek yogurt you could use sweet or savoury. So have a think about what style of yogurt that you've got, and that will translate to what things, recipe-wise, you can make with it afterwards. And I'll just pop this behind me again. Keep that draining for the curry I'm going to make for dinner tonight. Back to our bread. Okay, so with regards to bread, so there's croutons and there's breadcrumbs that you can make using stale bread. So as bread it goes towards the end of its shelf life, it can take up a whole lot of different guises. So it is still basically an origin from flour, and typically it's wheat flour. If it's not, that doesn't matter, it still will work. Here I have something that has been sampled. I don't think that's a problem with that because there's no point in cooking something if you're not going to sample it. So this has been sampled. So this is a bread cake. And I'm not sure if you can see, if you have a look at the texture from where it's cut, there's actually little breadcrumbs through it. So this was a bread cake that I made using some leftover wholemeal bread actually. So it was just a matter of making the breadcrumbs, so turning all of that bread into the crummy fashion, adding milk, letting that soak for 15-20 minutes or so, adding some egg, a little bit of sugar, and in this case I added some drinking chocolate, so I made it the chocolate context. And then I have lots and lots of rhubarb, so I poached some rhubarb and just put a few discrete pieces of rhubarb over the top, popped it in the oven, baked it, and then to add the extra chocolate fix, just made a little light chocolate ganache and dribbled that over the top. The word on the street, it's actually not too shabby. So that's good, So where I'm coming from, you should never be able to waste bread. There are so many things that you can make apart from croutons and breadcrumbs. Bread cake, bread and butter puddings, lots and lots of things. So just to revise where we're at, we are collectively not wasting any food, particularly none of the four. So we're not going to waste our bananas, we're not going to waste our spinach, we're not going to waste our bread, and we're not going to waste our yogurt. So we've got so many options now. We know how to store it better, and we've got lots of recipes that we can use. It's a fantastic starting point. Before I go, I just want to leave you with one more thing, and that is something that I've created. And for anyone who knows me, these creations could get a bit on the wild side, but I think this one comes together. So I felt like if these were the 4 ingredients that were identified as being the ultimate wastes, well, it's possible you'll have all 4 of them in your fridge at once. Let's make a dish that uses all 4 of them. So what I've done is I have, for each of the slices of bread, I made like a little sandwich. So I mixed together some mashed banana, some curry powder, and some yogurt, and I spread that on the slices. I then got some spinach and some ham and put that on top. And then I put the other piece of bread on top, so made the sandwiches. I made 4 of them. And then I cut them diagonally and put them in the baking dish. And then I mixed together some yogurt with half a dozen eggs and added some salt and pepper and poured that over the top. Then I put a cover over that and put that in the fridge for about an hour. That little detail is really, really important because you need the egg to soak into the bread. And then I took it out, sprinkled it with a little bit of cheese, popped it in the oven to bake. This is one of those dishes that is a crazy mix of flavours that will actually work. The banana with the sweet, the tang with the spinach, the tang with the ham, and the tang with a bit of cheese. Fantastic amalgamation. So it uses all 4 of those ingredients in the one dish. You'll actually find also it's fantastic if you think back to the meal planning presentation, and we talked about how there are times when you can do your subtle little preparation to make it so much easier for the end of the day dinner. This is the sort of thing that would work because you could make these sandwiches at the same time you're making other people's lunch sandwiches, have it all together, pop it in the fridge. It's ready as soon as you get home to pull it out and pop it in the oven. Perfect baking time. 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, done, 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 done. Dinner on the table. You gotta love that as a thought. Okay, so nearly done for this presentation. I just want to revisit some of the thinking that we had, and that is, so the actions for today, or from this presentation, you really want to make sure that you can avoid food waste at all costs possible. If you have any of these 4 ingredients, you now know how to store them, and you now know some recipes and some strategies to apply them. In addition to that, you know a particular recipe, but you can start to be creative in your own guises and make up whatever recipe suits for how you want to apply those ingredients that suit your household. Thanks so much for participating and coming along on this journey with us. We really appreciate it. These workshops are full of practical experiences and practical hints that you hopefully can take home and apply. And remember, the most important thing we like to really encourage and share for you to do is to minimise or reduce or completely eradicate food waste, save time and save your money. So for further recipe ideas, you can check out the Sustainability Victoria website, but by all means, flick through your own books, get inspired, give it a go, and make sure you don't waste food.